Council on World Affairs. I'm Steve Petrus. I'm chairman of the board of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, and it's a pleasure to have you here tonight for this important program. First of all, we want to welcome Frank Lavin back to Cleveland. He spoke here a couple of years ago, well, almost exactly a year ago, about the United States and China. And he's here tonight to talk to us about exporting, the importance of exporting. I also want a special welcome to Larry Miller. Larry, can you stand up, please? Larry is the president of Global Cleveland. And as some of you know, Global Cleveland is an initiative to attract immigrants and entrepreneurs to Cleveland. And Larry, who comes from Lubrizol, is now the president of that. And as some of you might know, the website globalcleveland.org was a website started by the Cleveland Council of World Affairs, which we have contributed to the Global Cleveland Initiative. Thank you very much. Before I begin the program, I wanted to announce a couple of upcoming events that I hope all of you will attend. First of all, many of you know about the situation along the border between Texas and Mexico and the drug wars that are going on. Last year, we had a speaker talk about the initiative to get Crime Stoppers into Juarez, Mexico. On August 12th, Wednesday, here at the Union Club at 6:30, we're going to have Jose Raiz Fariz, the former mayor of the city of Juarez, and he's going to talk about the effect of the drug wars in that city. As you know, Juarez is right across the Rio Grande from El Paso. On Friday, October 14th at 6 p.m., again here at the Union Club, we're going to have a very interesting program. Dr. Vamik Volcom is going to talk about killing in the name of identity. This is a psychological and psychiatric look at terrorism. It should be a fascinating program. Then on Tuesday, August 18th at 12 noon at the Union Club, we're going to have the Hungarian ambassador to the United States. His name is Georgi Sapari, and he's also a former senior official of the International Monetary Fund. So he will have something to say about the economic banking crisis, etc., in Europe. So I hope you will make all of those events. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the person who's going to introduce our speaker tonight. And so I'd like to ask Alan Goldner to come forward. Alan is a partner at the law firm of Benish Friedlander. He is the head of their Asia practice, and he is also a friend of Frank and will do the introductions.
Good evening, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Frank Lavin. You'll be happy to know that Frank gave me a very strict time limit, which I will adhere to. And what I really want to do is let you know why you should pay attention to Ambassador Lavin when he advises you to export now, and when he shares with you his 5 key goals for going global. As our country's ambassador to the Republic of Singapore from 2001 to 2005, and as an Undersecretary of Commerce from 2005 to 2007, Frank worked at the intersection of government and business, and has significant accomplishments in both areas. Since then, Frank has been spending years guiding U.S. companies entering new markets and going global, helping them formulate their export strategies. He's co-authored a book recently, Export Now. My colleagues and I have learned a great deal from him on both sides of the Pacific, and I know if you pay close attention to what he has to say this evening, you will as well. And so please join me in welcoming Cleveland native Frank Lavin.
Jumped ahead. There we go. Good. Well, good evening, everybody. Glad to be here. Glad to be back in Cleveland. I live in Hong Kong now, but spent a fair amount of time, most of this past few months in Shanghai on a new business project, which we can talk about, but it's great to be back home. Actually, a slight correction, very gracious introduction, Alan. Born and grew up in Canton down the road a bit, but I don't think it'd be presumptuous if I say when I'm back in Ohio, at least it's good to be back home. I just flew in, I was just at the Aspen Institute Idea Forum in Washington and was able to come right in. So it's good to be back home. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful, Steve and Yana, very grateful for the Cleveland Council for hosting this. It's always a pleasure. We had a very fun evening last year, got into a few very interesting topics. I hope we are able to do the same thing again today. I also want to introduce my colleagues from Export Now. So Export Now is a book, it's also a company, and it's Akron-based. And we have here today, so we have a U.S. team and a China team. We have here today, I think most or all of the U.S. team are with us today. So if you don't get anything out of the discussion today, at least make sure you talk to the leadership from this company. But John Hoover is our U.S. CEO. John's standing back by the pillar. Seth Lavin is our U.S. strategist. Claire Malone is marketing director, so they're all gathered together. And hidden here is Nate Hoover, too. So we're grateful that the team's here today as well. And I know Steve heard this when I visited last year, but when I fly into Hopkins, it always evokes a story from a few years back, because I worked, you saw in the background, I had the pleasure of working in the Reagan White House for most of his tenure. And the first time I flew into Cleveland with President Reagan, of course, you're taking Air Force of security reasons and for staging a motorcade. With any president, you don't pull up to the terminal and use the jetway. Actually, it's almost a remote part of the field, because you've got this rather long, sort of involved process there where dignitaries greet the president, and then there's a reasonably sizable motorcade, then there's a press pool, and there's a security team, and a medical team, and a communications team. It's quite an endeavor. So they always sort of stage this away from main traffic so they can line everybody up and not interfere with flight operations. It's sort of a normal procedure. Well, everything about this was pretty normal, except the plane lands, and because you're not using the jetway, they have to use what's not frequently used anymore, which is a ramp truck. And so the plane comes in fine, and it's taxis right to where the motorcade is staged, and the dignitaries are there, and the press is there, and everything's there, and they signal the ramp truck to come up, and the fellow comes up, and everything looks good, but he comes in at a slight angle, and it's just enough of an angle that it's not a closed seal, and he can't really open the door, and he can't really disembark. So he says, fine, yep. And because it just takes a second, he just back up and do it again. Well, he overcorrects. He comes back, and it's too much of an angle the other way. And clearly, this fellow has not been using the ramp truck a lot. And people at that time were starting to get a little jumpy, because it was all supposed to be timed and perfect, and the president whooshed right out. And so, no problem, do it a third time. And he gets it wrong the third time as well. And people are getting a little more testy. And that's when President Reagan said, well, I don't know this fellow, but I bet he has trouble getting his wife pregnant. Think about that for a second. So I thought that was a nice summary of the event. Anyhow, it all worked, had a happy ending. The whole event took about 1 minute, and the president went off. But I always have a smile whenever I come back to Hopkins and that event. We're here to talk about exporting, and I do have some slides I want to walk through. But let me set the stage up before I go through the slides, and just sort of tell you how I got to this point. As Alan indicated, I spent most of my professional life in the broad issue of new market entry. How do companies go into new markets? How do they select the markets? What things they do? Why did they succeed? Why did they fail? And I worked in government on that, on policy matters. I worked in banking in that area, and I'm now working in communications consulting, and we've got this Export Now company as well. And so it became a sort of a lifelong area of study for me, and it did. It resulted in this book, and a lot of this is drawn from books. But my last job at the U.S. Commerce Department, I I had sort of twin responsibilities of working on trade policy, trade negotiations, but also on export promotion, just helping companies get into the field. And so I, came away from that experience sort of stimulated about why we weren't doing better, what companies could do differently. And I left with a few key lessons or key findings. One finding that was very interesting to me, it really started me on this journey that led to this study, was there really wasn't a correlation between a company's competency in its home market and its competency in going overseas. And I was quite surprised at this finding, but we had all sorts of very strong, very successful companies in the United States that had an enormously difficult time going into new markets. And by the same token, you could have startups or companies that weren't particularly distinguished in their home market, but could rather easily get into new markets. And this was a surprising finding. I mean, I thought somewhat counterintuitive, but it brought home to me the core conclusion from this study, which was there must then be a set of disciplines that are required for successful new market entry that are different than the disciplines that are required for success in a home market. So whatever set of activities you have to undertake to be successful in your business aren't necessarily the same set of skills you need when you go into a new market. And I think this is a bit of a stretch, a bit counterintuitive, because I think most people view new market entry as just sort of an expanded version of domestic expansion. And most firms say, well, we've been growing for 30 or 40 years or 80 years. We're only in the last 10 years truly a national company, and so it's not that difficult to go into the market, it's just more expansion. So we're reasonably good at expansion. It can't be that bad to go into a new market. Well, but it is. And I'll tell you a second finding that I came across that also formed a background for a lot of this, is there are hard barriers and soft barriers, and we in government spent most of our time on the hard barriers of trade. Tariffs, duties, quotas, formal bans and prohibitions, and we worked to chip away at these formal barriers. And I think with a fair degree of success, if you look at what happened to trade patterns over the last few decades, it's become a more and more open world. We'll talk about that. But what's interesting is that leaves behind the soft barriers. So what do I mean by the soft barriers? Just language differences, currencies, cultural differences, market familiarity. And I think the toughest soft barrier is customer identification. So even if you can fix, so to speak, the hard barriers, the soft barriers can be overwhelming, especially for small businesses. So how do we deal with all that? How can we, let me get into this discussion a bit, and want to make three general areas that we're going to cover, and then we can take. We have time for questions at the end.
Yes.
Thanks, Steve. So we can get to questions. Look, I want to start with a general discussion of what's happened in international trade and international commerce over the last few decades, because when I examine U.S. companies that export and we look at the successes and the failures, one of the key elements, one of the key attributes of a failed export policy is that the company failed to define its goals and failed to build an internal consensus. So there was simply an impulse or desire to export, but the company hadn't formally thought through the process, hadn't necessarily formally planned or budgeted. So they were caught in a worthy goal, but they hadn't allocated the intellectual capital and the management responsibility to this task. So take a step back and say, what's happened? When we talk about globalization, what do we mean? And to my mind, it means these three things. I talked about the third one to say there's been an enormous change in trade barriers in the last few decades. When the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs was established in 1947, the United States had average weighted tariffs of about 40%. Now U.S. tariffs are just under 4%, so almost a 90% reduction in tariffs. And under 4%, it's really a nominal tariff. It's really not a barrier for most products. So trade barriers have substantially eroded. If we look at GATT rounds, WTO rounds, FTAs, agreements, and so forth. Go back up one, the depth of distance. What do I mean by that? Just the sheer physical distance used to be a determining factor in trade capabilities a few decades ago. But because of the internet, because of email, because of jet travel, because of containerized shipping, because of barcodes, because of Skype, the cost of distance, the cost of working cross-border has dropped to zero in many respects. So the ability to collaborate and work cross-border, to find customers, to deal with people in different markets has grown enormously. And we have parents here tonight who will go home and see their kid on Skype talking to somebody in Korea or somebody in Mexico, or we'll have people in college working on a term paper with somebody in Italy or somebody in Japan. And we have people here in business who regularly have to connect or communicate or collaborate with people in different markets. So distance is no longer the obstacle that historically has been. And the first point, I think, is the most important point, 3 billion new customers. What I mean by that is, in the last few decades, the economic population of the world has essentially doubled from 3 billion to 6 billion, because China moved to market economics, and then India moved to market economics, and Pakistan followed India. And many countries in sub-Saharan Africa moved along as well. And the collapse of the Soviet Union meant that Central Europe rejoined Europe, and the Soviet Union, Russia made adjustments as well. So the economic population of the world essentially doubled in 30 years. If you're an optimist, you say 3 billion new customers. If you're a pessimist, you say 3 billion new competitors. But in any event, all those factors together in a very short order is what I refer to when I talk about globalization. And we see it in the numbers. And that highlight red italic is sort of the core lesson, that it's never been easier for a foreigner to enter your market. It's never been easier for you to enter a foreign market. So what does this mean? I think every company's got to think about their role in the international environment. The second point here about horizontal skills and vertical skills, this is a rephrasing of a point I made before the presentation when I said, what are the skills that you need to be successful in your business in your home market? I call those the vertical skills. So if we talk to businesses represented here in this room, or any business in America, what we normally see is, look, we've got strong capabilities in a discrete set of activities. We have operations, we have finance, we have distribution and marketing, and we've been doing this for 50 years or 80 years, and we're reasonably strong in what we do. These vertical skills of making the set of activities. Danny, you want me to? Okay, so I can just bell them? Okay, thank you. I thought it was just a little friendly to come out here and talk about it. College professor. Well, but the point is, as I said earlier, look, that's great. That's a great starting point. You need to have those vertical skills. But those aren't probably the skills that mean that you're going to be successful in a new market. And I call those the horizontal skills. That you've got to find a way to connect and adapt in a new market. And it's an allied set of skills, but it's not directly related to what you do. And that takes us into the third point about how do you develop a horizontal skill. What are the horizontal skills? And it's that culture of adaptation and becoming a learning organism about what has to change and what has to be modified in order to be successful in a new market. So where you are going, where your company is going, becomes a key business issue. And this modus directly direct cost just speaks to why are you going abroad? Why are we having this discussion? What is the point of going into a new market? What is the value of going to a new market for the company? And only when we have that discussion can we say, well, then these are the costs, and these are the costs we can attach to that value, right? And so we can have a standard strategic planning exercise where we try to line up cost and benefit, and we allocate accordingly. And every company, by the way, can have a different answer to this. So if we look at what the main reasons given, the typical reasons, are just to learn and experiment, to broaden the slate, diversify. I mean, we see this particularly now with the U.S., I think, in a rather protracted period, unfortunately, of slow growth or flat growth. People just want to get to the faster growing markets. This is the most frequent reason, just to improve scale. MOTS stands for more of the same. I mean, people just say, look, I want more customers, I want more revenue, I want more profit, more of the same. I mean, if I'm doing something, I'm doing it well in my home market, I just want to do it in a new market. So it's not necessarily a lot of creativity here, but But if I want to grow, I've got to find a new market. And then there's a defensive reason too, that people are very aware of competitive dynamics here, and if they let competitors enjoy open run in a certain territory, then that can have strategic implications, because that competitor then can command a margin and scale in that new territory that can feed back into the home market competition. So who did this brilliantly, or failed to do this, who exploited this brilliantly, I think, were the Japanese automakers, who achieved a dominant or monopolistic position across Asia, and that gave them all sorts of scale that allowed them to compete very effectively in the United States, and the U.S. automakers unfortunately stayed out of Asia. So the first set of discussions are just are sort of internal to the company. What are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? How are you dealing with this phenomenon of globalization? And then how will you make decisions that will allow you to move ahead? Now we'll talk about the actual keys themselves. And I list them out here: country, customers, competitors, capabilities, gap. And I'll trot through that. Look, we also found, so we talked about companies that go abroad and how they fail and why they get it wrong. And that first part of the discussion was a lot of them just get it wrong in the initial planning process. They get it wrong strategically. They don't fully understand their motives and their rationale or what they're trying to accomplish or the world they're operating in. They don't have an internal consensus. They don't allocate resources in the right fashion, and they do it more in the form of an impulse rather than a plan. So that's a key area of failure. Interestingly, in my work, the area that was the second most frequent contributor to failure was this: picking the country. So it wasn't tactical; it was almost at the strategic level. Companies got it wrong right at the start. And this is just a summary. So I'd love it if you buy the book, but you don't have to buy the book now. There's a lot more details, a richer discussion of the book. But look, we can sum it up in kind of an aphorism that, there's sort of two worlds, I think, in the business world. There's MBA world and there's TBW. And in MBA world, we talk about upside. And in TBW, we think about downside. So in an MBA world, and probably most people here are in genuine terms or virtual terms in that MBA world, we talk about opportunity, we talk about optimization, we talk about allocating against resources, because we're trying to get this company to move ahead, right? And that's sort of normal MBA planning. TBW world, that stands for traditional business world. This is where I think most SMEs especially are in the United States, and for good reason. It's not a criticism. TBW is downside oriented, not upside oriented, because they accept all of these things. They accept that we need to go overseas, but we have enormous constraints. We have enormous management bandwidth constraints, and we have capital constraints. We don't have the money that a Fortune 500 company has to put a team into a new market and do strategic planning. So Procter & Gamble will have teams that can go into new markets, they can study new markets, and they'll do strategic planning. But most companies aren't in that level of activity. So most companies have to be downside motivated, which is to say, get me a solution that is easy. I can export, but I can only export if it's within my capabilities. So that takes us to point number one. So the single most common mistake in that regard was that companies would say, I'm only upside oriented. I'm an American company, I want to export. Therefore, what I need to do is look at the largest market in the world, and that's where I'm going to go. Which, there's a certain logic there. We're going to understand if you're going to do this, you might as well try to earn some money. So there's a certain logic there. But my point that we have to keep in mind is that violates the very first rule, which is you need to really focus on degree of difficulty for your first market. If you've never done it before, if you don't have those internal capabilities, you've got to choose an easy market rather than a large market. You can always build toward a larger market. So we would say, look, your strategy, your initial targets have to focus much more on complexity of market entry to simple markets. Over time, you can build toward the higher value markets. So this means for most American companies, what? What markets are you thinking of? Canada,
Mexico. Yeah, if we say if China's where you want to end up, that's great. I'll tell you something about China in a few minutes. But normally for most companies, if you're just trying to do traditional export methods, China's not where you want to start, although I'm going to argue to the contrary in a minute. The point is respect is implicit in the market. Now, this is the contrarian, because there are global channels. This is a chance to talk about this company. What do I mean by global channels? I mean internet-based activity. So, for example, any company that sells off of a website should think about how do we globalize that. If you have a corporate website, how many languages is your website in? Can you take credit card information from foreign countries? Is the field for phone numbers or zip codes such that if somebody's in the UK or Canada and has what we would say is a funny zip code, that it will still take that field, or does the system spit it out? So you've got to have you can globalize your e-commerce channel reasonably simply, reasonably inexpensively. Also, here's an example on the outbound, but you can do this from your desk also reasonably inexpensively. Export Now the company is a company that allows U.S. companies to sell onto China's e-commerce platform from their office, from their desk. So it just sets up an English language screen so that you can sign up for a Chinese website the same way you sign up for eBay or Amazon Shops. You ship the goods in, there's a logistics channel, then all the orders are fulfilled from China. So the Chinese customer buys in Chinese language, pays in Chinese currency, has Chinese CRM, but the American company just signs up in English and deals with American CRM in the US and ships through. So there are neat ways nowadays in this sort of world of e-commerce that let us short circuit traditional distribution methods. So you no longer have to fly to Shanghai or hire a China team. You can sign up on the e-commerce platform and you're in the China market. And this is just from it's Taobao's the site, it's just an e-commerce site in China. And then people ask, well, but what do they ever buy? What do they ever buy on Taobao? Is it chopsticks and rice bowls? Well, to give you a reference point, eBay last year in the U.S. had turnover of $4 billion. Taobao had $40 billion turnover. So Taobao is 10 times as much throughput as eBay, not on an economy that's a lot smaller. All right, second point is customers. This, again, is just a diagnostic point, I think, for companies, that every single customer base is different. Even if the product's the same, the market's not radically different, but how people use the product and what they want out of the product and what kind of demographic group uses your product can very well be different in a new market than in your home market. And this has implications for the firm about how you adapt and adjust your product slate. It might be a financing adjustment, it might be a distribution adjustment, it might change the slate itself, you might adapt the product itself, but you've got to get into diagnostic mode, I think, in order to effectively grapple with the changes required in the new market. And we talked through some of the methodology of what companies need to do in order to understand the changes they have to undertake in these new markets. I think in the home market, companies tend to discount a lot of market dynamics, and I think especially in the United States. And what do I mean? Because the United States market is a heavily mature market. Sure, you might be in the tech sector, you might be in pharmaceuticals, you might be in some special area where it's not mature, where it's very innovative, fast-moving. But for most consumer goods, for most industrial goods, it's a mature market. And there are incremental changes and incremental shifts, but there's not sharp shifts. When you go into a new market, it might not be fully defined, and there can be a very different competitive dynamic in these new markets. And competitors will behave differently, and that has implications for how you behave as well. So that takes us back to solutions. So what kind of capabilities do you need? What do you need to bring on board in order to successfully compete in this new market? I just want to call your attention to one of these guideline points, the second one, which is, in our view, when you enter a new market, you're looking at a lot of variables, a lot of changes in the system. And so one rule of thumb is try to control as many of these variables as possible. So you might find that middle market product in the United States is more of a premium product in a market like Mexico. So it might have significantly smaller market share. But nonetheless, you're establishing your position within that smaller demographic. Over time, you can try to be more middle market. You can introduce new variations or less expensive variations, and you can try to reach the middle market. But at least to start with, you want to control as many variables as possible. And the capabilities is pretty straightforward. That you have earned and built certain brand reputation and certain set of functional strengths in your home market over the life of the company. Those don't always translate overseas. The markets are different, and business practices are different, and the customers are different. So what you do and why you do it at home doesn't always work in the same way as it might overseas. And this has implications for firm behavior as well. So at home, you've got at least two core advantages: that you're an established firm and you've got reasonable volume. And of course, overseas, you don't have any of those advantages. And so one of our conclusions is you've got to look at variations on structure overseas. What gets you to where you want to go as quickly as possible. So for example, you might run all of your distribution activity through your company in your home market because you've got volume, because you always did it this way. Because somebody started 80 years ago with 2 trucks, and now you have 200 trucks. But when you think about it, there's no particular need or rationale why you're doing your own distribution, and that's not just core competency. You're not a trucking company, you're a manufacturing company. So when you go overseas, you might want to just forego all warehouse distribution, logistics, and contract that out, and that just might allow you to get to a successful point much more rapidly. And this is just a schematic to say the 6 set of activities this company undertakes in its home market. It adopts a smorgasbord approach in different markets. I mean, it's identified the one activity it absolutely must protect in each market from this schematic is just sales. To say, we don't really care what we do in any market, but we're sure as heck going to sell in these markets. And then we're going to let volume and domestic attributes in these markets determine what other kind of activities we do. So we have an a la carte approach to corporate organization. But I think what's particularly wise about this is they said, look, we don't have to precisely mimic our corporate structure in our home market in every single other country. There might be reasons not to do it. We might run finance in country A and B out of our home market, right? But country C might be large enough that we need something indigenous, or they might have a regulatory requirement that we put in something indigenous. So let's let the market determine what we're doing in each country. Let's not just do it out of habit. And I'm going to wrap up with the plan, if I've got this right. Well, this is a restatement of my earlier point, that you've got to undertake this as a formal business decision. And it can't simply be an impulse or a whim or a goal, but it's got to be done through a consensus or a vote or any other kind of formal activity in the company, so people understand that it's a commitment of time and money, that could well lose money for a given time, and but you decided that the ultimate goal is worth the cost. I think we wrap up on cultural gap. Look, here's the point on culture. Every society can be different, and indeed, even within the United States or any country, there can be differences in how people approach these kinds of issues. And for the outsider coming into a country, our goal is always to say, well, look, I don't want to do anything wrong. I'm here to conduct business, I want to fit in, I want to show respect, I want to be professional, and I don't fully understand all of these points in a new market. Even if I might have some familiarity with this market, I just might have to be off on the wrong foot. So how do I deal with this? Our point is, look, we're not going to provide you with an encyclopedia type response where you can flip through and find Mexico, and then you can flip again and find Argentina, and you can flip and find China. And it's going to be too voluminous, it's not going to be accurate, and it's going to change in any event. So it's not so much that there's one precise answer to this, it's that if you adopt the right approach, you'll discern the answers yourself. And so the key to success with these kind of questions are just some very simple behavioral advice for the American who's going is your first day is when you sit down with your banker and your lawyer and your accounting firm, and you're just having your internal meetings, and you can understand, you can ask these kind of questions. You can ask on the margin of a discussion with your accountant. You say, I've been invited to a dinner tonight, what would be an appropriate house gift to bring? So you can pick this up as you go along. But you've got to develop that kind of outward-looking approach. And then finally, the summary. Take action. Don't get that far, but I think that just summarizes the five C's that I tried to leave. Well, I hope you enjoyed that overview. I'd be very glad to take questions. Yeah, please.
Last year, I enjoyed your presentation very much, and I wonder if you have any particular comments on how doing business at a small, micro level with China has changed.
I think in the last 2 or 3 years, China has changed in some positive ways, but also potentially some negative ways and more challenging ways. Positively, China's continued economic growth means that there's increasing convergence between their consumers and what we make. So it's still a developing country, still poor on a per capita basis in the United States, but that middle class is booming, that middle class is sophisticated, that middle class wants what we make. So even if you're talking about a portion of that country, it's still hundreds of millions of people. For example, 370 million consumers in China are online, buy online. So that's it's only a third of the country, but that's a huge population base. So that's the good news, is it's more affluent, more international, it fits more closely with U.S. products. But I think the challenges are that in the regulated space, there's more economic nationalism, frankly. So if you're in telecommunications or banking or some tech areas, there's definitely a tilt more toward the indigenous firms. I think it's tougher competition. If you're in the consumer space, if you're McDonald's or Pepsi or Procter & Gamble, I think you're having a golden moment. It's incredible. McDonald's took 20-some years to build their first 1,000 outlets in China, and it took something like 2 years to build the next 1,000. So, yeah, because it's the same reason Americans go there. So, you've got a middle class that is urban and has increasingly expensive tastes and also less time. More money, less time. You say that's what fast food is for. So please come in. So it's a great time for American firms, particularly in that consumer space. Yes, sir.
Ambassador, I want to say thanks a lot for coming. I really enjoyed your presentation. To piggyback on what the young lady said, as it relates to China, some of our colleagues in Europe, they don't see China as a big growth market because of the regulation that you mentioned, particularly as it relates to protecting intellectual property. My question is, what are your thoughts on countries like Brazil, Argentina, who, like China, definitely have a growing middle class that's actually close to our borders?
Sure.
What's your perception regarding those countries, and in particular, to make it actually local? Ohio is probably one of the closest states to Canada, actually a very large trading partner. I guess my question is, if you were a local business here in Ohio, what would you do to enhance your trade with Canada?
Yeah. First, I love the premise of your question because I think you're absolutely right. Look, every market is worth something, and it depends on the business. But it's an exercise called market sizing. That depending on what you do or how you make it, we can measure the size of every market, and it's going to be different for toothpaste than it is for personal computers than it is for jet airplanes. But the people in strategic planning at Dell Computer or Procter & Gamble or Boeing understand what these markets are worth. But the point is then that allows you to prioritize, that allows you to target. And if you can't go through that exercise, you can always just look at GDP figures or size of country. But that can get you a little bit off because the bottom of the pyramid aren't buying laptops. They might buy toothpaste, but they're not buying a Boeing either. So you've got to have some of the kind of screen on it than just raw GDP. So if we were talking with a company about what's our global strategy, I think we would say something like, let's look at the size of these markets. Let's look at the top 10 or 20 markets in the world and decide what they are going to purchase in the product family that we manufacture. And then let's have that grid be measured against a degree of difficulty in these markets. So let's try to understand our priorities. And then depending on the size of our company, we'll say, look, we can only manage a program this year going into one country or two countries. We can't manage 8 or 10 countries. So let's pick the 2 most promising countries from this bit of analysis. Now, my point earlier was, look, don't focus on upside if you're a small company. Focus on downside, focus on degree of difficulty, which, as you suggested, for American companies is heavily going to be Canada and Mexico. Depending on what you make, it might be something else, but for a lot of U.S. companies, that's the easiest market to get to. Highest degree of familiarity, it's pretty easy to call, it's easy to understand, so forth. So those are very likely. So no surprise, about 1/3 of all U.S. exports just go to Canada and Mexico. No surprise on that. Look, I'm a huge fan of getting into Canada. It's again, I try to take everything back to cost-benefit analysis. What's the upside for your product and your company in Canada, and how can you get there, and what resources does it take to get there, and you have better opportunities in other markets. And let me give you a contrarian example, and this is back to the global channels. What if you made a specialty product, a niche type product, where you'd say, sure, there's a market in Canada, but it's not huge, but there's actually a global market for this product. So let's say you make a specialty bicycle gear that the true racing bike aficionados want. So you're making a really highly expensive bike product that most weekend bikers don't want to be. But if you're a serious competitive biker, you say this gear this fellow makes in Cleveland is fantastic, and you've got to buy it. If you're competing, you need to buy this, and it might be $1,000. Well, what you have there by virtue of your product is a global product. I mean, there'll be people all over the world who want it. It's not huge numbers. But that's an instance where I'd say, look, having a Canada strategy probably doesn't help you. You might sell a few thousand a year in the U.S., you might sell another 100 a year in Canada. You really need a global strategy. That's right back into that global channel, it's the web page. That's why I'd say, you know what I need to do is I need to have this web page in 10 different languages. And I need to make sure that I'm optimizing on search engines in 10 different languages. And I want people all around the world to be able to find me. And I've got a global brand, a global reputation. Even as a small company, people know me and want me. There are plenty of U.S. companies like that. Think of the companies that make specialty musical instruments. Think of, there are people around the world who say, I'm a serious guitarist, but I can only play Gibson guitar or Fender or Martin, and that's what I need to get. And I don't mind paying a premium, because that's my life, or that's my fixation. So I'll pay $1,000 for that Martin guitar, right? So, so Martin will be shipping all around the world. It's not a big company, right? But if you love that product, you love that product. Yes, sir.
I have a quick question about when you're entering a new market, say you're smaller, say you decide to employ some joint ventures or distribution for global distributors, like that. What are some of the things to look out for, or what are some of the strengths or weaknesses that you employ in that?
I'm sorry, tell us, restate that please.
Using either a distributor
Yeah.
in another country,
Yeah.
or sort of like a sales rep in another
Sure.
country, or having a joint venture.
Sure.
What are some of the strengths or weaknesses of that?
Sure,
strategy?
sure. By the way, that's pretty common. I'll tell you, the big weakness is you're at the mercy of somebody else's priority, right? And so frequently, a sales rep or distributor will handle a wide array of products. They won't put any special emphasis on yours, but they simply say, look, I handle plumbing equipment, bathroom fixtures and plumbing equipment, and I have 100 different companies around the world of whom I'm a distributor. So I'm sort of indifferent about which one of those 100 buy, because I just happen to own the distributorship for all of them. So if anybody's coming in my town and says I'm building a new office building or apartment building and I need plumbing fixtures, I'll just show them the book. So the good news is you're in the market, you've got someone. The bad news is that fellow's not incentivized to actually move your products, and he will typically have a family and a race, so you can get lost in the shuffle. I would say it's better than nothing, but I'd say it's not your best. I think best is you want somebody who's working for you. That could be a distributor who has nobody else in that family, or somebody has an exclusive relationship, or somebody has a payroll, or a super premium commission rate, so the person is heavily incentivized. But I think what I feel comfortable with the distribution model is it's a very passive model. It's not a strategy, it's not a plan. It's sort of like saying I'm in the phone book in this new country. The fellow, if they find me, they can call me, they can order. But it's not a marketing plan. It's not how am I going to get in the market. So it's a foot in the door strategy. I guess if your product is strong and your brand is strong, you don't need to worry about marketing. People do try to find you. I mean, if you're distributing Gibson guitars in the country, there'll be people find you. And if you simply have the Gibson webpage and it simply says in Mexico, this is our distributor, people will call that person up. I mean, because it's a powerful brand. But for a lot of other products, you say, look, I need to build sales. I need a strategy that's going to help me move this product. I think just having a distributor will make you do. Yeah, let me ask.
Mr. Ambassador, today's front page New York Times said a very depressing story about all of Europe being concerned that their recession is going to be way longer.
Yeah.
If that's true, if their prediction is true,
Yeah.
and it goes into our market in America, in the
Sure.
U.S.,
Sure.
how can we assuage that? Can we
Sure.
catch it before it happens? Or?
Well, but I think that's why we're in this room. I said there are, we wrote that one slide about the 5 reasons, the 5 most common reasons why people look for a new market. One is just to improve scaling of TS, more of the same. One is just I want to sell more. But one is because of diversification and economic cycles. That your home market might be in a down cycle, or your number 2 market might be in a down cycle. You can't just say my strategy is to wait, and sooner or later we'll probably come out of it. But I said that's not a strategy, that's a hope. I mean, I think it will come out of it, but you better do something in the meantime to try to get sales up. And so if we look around the world at faster growing markets, we say, why aren't we in these markets? So let's just be smart about it. So I would advise any American to think about international activity, no matter how big you are, how small you are. There's some simple steps you can do that will at least make you a little competitive in some of these other markets. So you're not simply a prisoner of our domestic GDP numbers.
Can we take advantage of what, if it's true, and what their consensus is, if it's true in Europe, can we as Americans take advantage, like in Cleveland, take advantage of that by doing this the opposite, bringing in companies from and businesses from Europe where they're going bankrupt, coming in, showing them cities in America that would give them another future.
Yeah, listen, I think inward investment, inward FDI is enormously helpful to the U.S. economy. And I think it's on the uptick because other countries have money and we have depressed assets. So it's more and more appealing to come to the United States because you can do very well. I mean, the stock value and greenfield activities is reasonably inexpensive now to do this. So it's very attractive for the cash-rich countries to do this. So I think we'll see record numbers of investment from China and other places to get that U.S. footprint. And as you know, it's not just the access to the U.S. market, but the U.S. has now free trade agreements with 14 other markets. So once you're in the U.S., you now have duty-free access to about 1/3 of the world GDP. So it's not a bad landing pad for other kind of activity. So I think we'll see a lot of that. You're right. Then the question comes, well, how do you get your fair share or more than your fair share? How do you compete? That's tough to do because everybody's out there competing to do it. But there's no reason at all why people shouldn't be able to make its case. So it's got to be able to get in the game. And I worked overseas in several different capacities. For example, in Shanghai right now, there are about 30 different U.S. states and cities that have offices there that work in the FDI. And I'm not saying we need to do that, but I mean, the other people in this game, and you got to work to earn that sale. Yeah.
That's to kind of piggyback off of her question.
Yeah.
Pricing, because it's interesting. Although we do have a lot of distressed access here in the United States, some of our foreign partners, they don't see the U.S. as being attractive simply because the other currency values. And it's because, a lot of the European countries, particularly those in Western Europe, are beginning to fit this bill. Many of them are beginning, like the Swiss, they're beginning to value their currency, which definitely helps their country their country, but you know, for exporters, it actually hurts you in some aspects.
Sure.
So I guess in your book, you actually talk about how do companies get over that currency valuation, because that also can hurt a small company if
Sure.
you're not aware of that.
Sure. Yeah, I would start with the strategic question about why are we going abroad? What's the point of going abroad, and what are we going to do to try to reach those goals? So that's sort of the first set of discussions. The second set of discussions are sort of more in terms of the corporation about, all right, which country do we go after? What do we have to do to be successful there? What kind of changes, adaptation do we have to make? How do we understand the market and the customers, and how do we close the capability gap? So those are, I would say, commercial set of issues. I think you do have to get to the financial set of questions too. I mean, you can't achieve your margin in this new market, is still worth doing. If there's volatility in this market, which by the way is also what we say when we talk about controlling variables and why home markets and like markets are better, because look, you'll have some movement with the Canadian dollar, you'll have some more movements with the Mexican peso, but they're probably not radical movements since those economies are so close to the United States anyhow. But if you go to more exotic markets, more distant markets, you can see bigger movements. And if you don't have you have a good CFO and a good finance department, they say, but you know, we've never done currency. We've never had to do it. Basically, we do payroll, we do remittances, we do some financing, we do some capital markets work. We've never done any FX work. So I mean, the point is your finance department has to get up to speed on it. By the way, there are plenty of instruments. And I worked for Citibank and Bank of America, the MNC group in Asia, for about 5 years, and it's a very standard question. The typical question would be a U.S. MNC would say, I'm selling about $1 million a month of my product into Indonesia, and I need to take out $1 million a month. You figure out how I do that, and if I do that, I get my bonus, and you get your bonus. So you make it work. I mean, so it's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to do, but I'm going to do it for it. I'm going to charge you for it. But it's not that hard to do. But I think for a smaller company that says, look, I've never done this, I've got this weird order from Indonesia, what do I do? But I said, look, I'd start talking to the banker. And you know, what's interesting to me in the last 5 or 10 years, the banks, you know, whether it's PNC or JP Morgan Chase or Citi, the mid-market group now has an FX person. And you can talk to your banker and say, I want to go to the FX briefing because I'm getting these weird orders in, and I don't know how to handle it. And how do I get payment? How do I make sure I protect my margin? And I don't want to be, you know, I can give this guy terms for 90 days, but I've got to get the money that I'm quoted. So you have to start having these kind of discussions to make sure that that's it.
Frank, what we're going to do, time for 2 more questions.
All right.
And then we're going to go into a reception
All right,
afterwards,
good.
so you'll be available for
Thanks.
that too.
Okay, go ahead.
Right here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a comment. U.S. small and mid-sized corporations here in Cleveland, or I should say Cleveland small and mid-sized companies, will never succeed overseas unless somebody finds a cure for American narrow-mindedness. And I have a reason for saying that because I'm very experienced in international trade from Cleveland, having seen most of the exporters here sell on ex-works basis. You know, their customer, they're saying to their customers, you want my product, you come get it.
Right.
Okay, they're not thinking ahead.
Right.
You know, to get more market.
Sure.
They just don't know.
Sure.
I know a company on East 93rd Street that shut down because they turned down an order from Nissan because they had to deal with Mexico.
Yeah.
And the company just said, I'm not dealing with it.
Right.
And I hate to say it, but they're never going to succeed unless someone changes people's.
Sir, I think you've been a very passionate discussion of what we were calling earlier the horizontal skills. To say you've got to understand what motivates people in different markets and what their needs are in those markets, and you've got to adapt and adjust. And if you simply say, I can stay by my phone and let this fellow call me, yeah, that'll work, but it'll only really work for the domestic market. By the way, I would say even your domestic market, you're at risk. Because if you're passive and your competitor is out there talking to the customer, I mean, he's going to find a better solution, a better pricing, better distribution. That business is going to drift away from you. So you've got, I think smart businesses are nimble businesses and are learning organizations. And, you know, it's sort of a 1950s model is the one that says, this is what I make and you can buy it from me and that's it. And then I'm basically a waiter in a restaurant. You tell me, I show you the menu, you order from the menu and I deliver the goods. I'd say that model is, I think, a risky model because it ignores sort of the first part of selection about the way the world is changing and customers are changing and businesses need to change as well. So I think you're absolutely right.
Real quick, I was at a trade show, or I was attempting to, when I was first going to this trade show in Accra, Ghana last year, when I applied for the trade show, there wasn't a slot for the United States. There wasn't a field. And I asked them why. I had reason to send an email to them. Why was the United States not even a part of this? And they said, because we've asked, but no one ever showed up.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got 95% of our exporters out here in Cleveland have quality products that could be, taking over markets in the developing world. They just don't. It's such a crying shame.
It is a shame, and look, there's going to be a Darwinian result to this. The folks who figure this out are going to survive, the folks who don't are really in peril, I think. And as I said, you can't even stay static in your home market because some fellow in other markets is going to say, I can get into the U.S. now, 3% tariff, 4% tariff, I can compete. So why should I let this old line Cleveland firm that's been dominant for 100 years have a market? Why don't I come after them? And so you've got to figure this out and come to terms with it, or your company's at risk. Good advice.
One more quick, Martin.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Marnie Sweet. My question is related to whether or not Chinese business people are concerned with their skills in English, and if they are, whether their preference is British English, Standard American, Australian.
You will be glad to know we have won this battle. You'll be glad to know. So for all of the sometimes complaints we have about American popular culture, there's enormous value in it as well, because I think the U.S. is extremely good at cultural exports, and it's kind of a global industry, whether it's movies or television or popular music, game shows, anything. It's a huge global marketplace, and people who want to learn English want to learn American English. Overwhelmingly, I'd still say there's some British colonies that have a more of an orientation toward Britain, but in places like China and Japan, it's going to be overwhelmingly U.S. oriented.
And would you say then that their interest in etiquette would be more related to the more casual American etiquette? Are they interested in etiquette, or are they?
Well, they're interested in the broader world. And look, we're talking about the top tier. We're talking, and you have the same discussion in the United States, the top decile. But there's a hungry segment of the population in markets like China and India that would fit comfortably into this discussion we're having right here. The future belongs to those who are externally oriented, to build on the previous gentleman's point. And the future belongs to those who are collaborators, those who can operate cross-border. And there's excellence all around the world, but how do you find it, how do you harness it the way you need it? But that requires navigational skills, some of which is language, some of which is cultural and etiquette. But you've got to figure out how to do it. And if you're intimidated or overwhelmed by it, then you're limiting yourself to your zip code. And your zip code, you're lucky in the U.S., your zip code might be 300 million people, but you're still limiting yourself. If you say, look, there's a problem or a challenge or an opportunity out there, and I'm going to go tackle it, and I don't care about the language, I'm going to figure it out. Good for you, because you're going to be in a leadership position, your company's going to be in a leadership position. So what's impressive to me about people who are in that top tier in China or in the U.S. is that's exactly the action they'll take, which is to say, we're going to be successful in every market in the world. We've got something to offer everybody, and we're going to figure it out. And a lot of the great U.S. companies now are companies that 50 years ago said, it was Pepsi and Ford and Boeing and Procter & Gamble who said, we've got a global product and we've got to be serious about taking this into the world. And they've done a very good job. So there's all sorts of excellence there. I guess what I'm saying is that dynamic is no longer limited to that top tier, that Fortune 500. That set of opportunities and challenges now permeates our entire business environment. So even the very small business has to start thinking globally, has to start thinking internationally, and the competitors thinking about it. So we need to be doing the same.
So Edelman is 7th in the world, yes, in public relations?
I would have said a higher number, but I'll take your word for it. But I read the internal corporate propaganda, so maybe I've got it wrong.
So what arm of Edelman helps the small business owner who wants to expand?
Well, Edelman is fundamentally a communications, public affairs, public relations shop. And so we do, for example, in China, we are the agency globally, we're the agency of record for Starbucks and for Pepsi. So when Starbucks opens up, has a new product launch, or Pepsi has a new product launch in China, we'll be in charge of product rollout, launch, and so forth for that product. Well, absolutely, it'd be interested in helping small companies communicate, but it's a communication shop. It doesn't typically deal with this set of issues with fundamentally commercial questions. But once you've said, I want to start selling in Argentina or Mexico or Canada, and how do I do a product launch, or how do I position my product, or here's how people think about my product, my home market, how are they going to think about it in Canada, I think Edelman's a great shop to talk to, absolutely. In fact, I guess the question, I'd almost kind of turn that around to say, I would advise people, especially in the consumer space, to have a public relations firm in the domestic market. I mean, I think there's a comment we can make about the 21st century, about communications in the 21st century. Every company is a communications company. Every company has a story to tell, and every company better tell it. And it might be something very simple from a web page and some occasional updates. It might be something more complicated that's actually related to sales and marketing. But every company has to tell its story, has to communicate with different audiences, with customers, with suppliers, with employees, with its community. So the point is, your starting point would be, how do you do that in your home market? What's your communication strategy in your home market? And then how do we ramp that up? And I say ramp that up because in a new market, you don't have that embedded advantage where basically everybody knows you. I mean, if you're Campbell Soup, every single American knows Campbell Soup. And every single American probably says, it's good soup. And I might not have it or have it every day, but, we respect the brand, the company, and what they do, and so we have to develop. But if Campbell Soup goes in a brand new market, people say, look, I've never heard of your company. That's not how we have soup. In fact, that kind of soup isn't how we have soup. And this whole thing has been mysterious to me. This strikes me as a very exotic ethnic specialty, what you guys do here. And I'm not sure it's for me and my family or why we should never try it. And indeed, the way you tell us to prepare it is different, and the meal you tell us to serve it is different. The whole thing strikes me as very unusual. So I don't get it. So the point is, if you were Campbell Soup, you said, look, we need